Imagine this, it's 11:49 p.m. in Washington, D.C., and the air over Capitol Hill feels electric and strangely thin. The chamber lights are still blazing long after they should have gone dark. Senators sit frozen at their desks, staffers hover in the aisles, unsure whether to look at their phones or the big board above the presiding officer's chair. The final numbers have just locked into place. Across every major network, the same breaking news banner burns across the bottom of the screen. CO Andres Vries, TO, XPO, XPL, Presidente and TREMP. Outside, the crowd doesn't cheer at first, it just stops. A murmur rolls through the people pressed up against the metal barriers as if an entire country is inhaling at the same time and forgetting how to exhale. Commentators fumble for words. Cameras search for reactions. Somewhere in a cable studio, a Maddow'S-style anchor finally breaks the silence. Tonight, she says slowly, democracy won, but here's the truth. This moment hasn't happened, at least not yet. What you're watching right now is a scenario, a thought experiment, a carefully constructed what if designed to answer a harder question. What would it actually look like if American democracy decided to hold a president fully to account? By the time we're done, you'll decide for yourself whether democracy won tonight would be a fair description or a dangerously simple story we tell ourselves about something far more complicated. And to even imagine this headline, we first have to understand what would have needed to happen inside Congress itself. Because votes like this do not appear from nowhere. They are the final, visible shockwave decisions made long before tonight in these halls. In our scenario, that flashing banner saying, Congress votes to expel President Trump is really shorthand for something much more complex and rare. The Constitution does not actually contain a neat little expel the president button. What it provides is impeachment by the House of Representatives and conviction by a two-thirds supermajority in the Senate. So if we're imagining this night honestly, we have to imagine that both of those extraordinary thresholds have already been crossed. Picture the sequence. Months earlier, the president doesn't just flirt with the edge of legality, he stomps across it. He openly defies multiple federal court orders or unilaterally redirects tens of billions of dollars that Congress has explicitly appropriated elsewhere. On February 3rd, the House Judiciary Committee opens emergency hearings. By March 12th, after a blizzard of subpoenas and testimony, the committee votes 27-13 to approve articles of impeachment alleging willful violation of the Constitution and abuse of power. A week later, the full House debates those articles under wall-to-wall coverage. On March 19th at 8:46 p.m. Eastern, the clerk reads the roll. When the tally is announced 2-48 in favor, 187 against, the president becomes once again officially impeached. The process then crosses the Capitol into a Senate that has every incentive to stall, dilute, or bury the case. But in this scenario, the evidence is too stark, the breach too public. Over 3 tense weeks in April, the Senate holds a trial that feels less like routine politics and more like a national intervention. Witnesses describe orders ignored, laws treated as suggestions. Markets wobble. Allies call. Voters flood phone lines. And on April 9:32 p.m., the Senate does what almost no casual news watcher truly thinks it ever will by a vote of 71-29. It convicts and removes the president. That is what sits behind a single headline. To really feel the gravity of this imagined night, we have to step back even further and look at the constitutional machinery that such a verdict would drag into motion. Because only when you see those hidden gears turning together can you understand how extreme a crisis this would represent and how rarely the American system even approaches using its full constitutional power in practice. To understand why this hypothetical night matters, you have to strip away the personalities and look at the machinery underneath. The American system was built on one stubborn idea. No single branch, and certainly no single person, is supposed to hold all the power. Article I gives Congress the power to write the laws and control the money. Article 2 I gives the president the job of carrying those laws out, not rewriting them on the fly. The courts interpret what the law and the Constitution actually mean. That triangle is called separation of powers, and it only works if each side respects the boundaries. In our scenario, Congress is not just smacking down a political rival it happens to dislike. It is using one of the harshest tools. It has to say, in effect, the line is here and you crossed it. Impeachment and removal are the constitutional fire alarm behind glass. You do not break that glass over a tweet or a bad policy speech. You break it when a president acts as if loyalty and raw force outrank law and written limits. On one side of this story is a leader who treats court orders like suggestions, budget rules like optional fine print, and the oath of office like a campaign slogan. On the other side are the slow, sometimes clumsy, often frustrating institutions trying to prove that the rules still mean something, even when it is politically dangerous to enforce them. Most people who skim headlines never see this tug of war clearly. They hear the shouting, they feel the chaos, but they do not realize how close the country may be drifting toward those red lines. That is why this scenario matters even as pure what if. The more you understand about how this system is supposed to work, the harder it is for any leader to convince you that legality is whatever they say it is. But none of this happens in a vacuum. For a night like this to unfold, the real story would be told behind closed doors, inside both parties, and especially inside Trump's own political camp. That is where fear, ambition, and loyalty truly collide hard. The public sees the polished statements, the solemn faces in front of marble columns, the carefully chosen words about serious concerns, and taking our constitutional responsibilities seriously. What they do not see in this hypothetical are the rooms just down the hall where the air smells like cold coffee and fear. In one windowless conference room, Republican senators sit around a long table, phones face down, as a leadership aide clicks through polling slides. Back home, the base still roars for Trump, but in the suburbs and among independents, numbers are collapsing. Donors are quietly asking if there will be anything left to defend if this crisis is allowed to rot on the vine. No one says it out loud at first. Then a senior Republican, a figure who has defended Trump through every previous scandal, finally breaks. If we don't act now, he says, voice low, there won't be a party left to save. The words hang there heavier than any talking point. Across the Capitol, Democrats huddle in their own cramped offices. They know what their voters want. They also know how this will look to the millions who already believe the system is rigged. Staffers warn about images on right-wing media, about being painted as gleeful executioners rather than reluctant surgeons cutting away a tumor to save the patient. Everyone in both parties is gaming out the same terrifying scenario, a single tweet turning into a wave of threats, a rally speech turning into something uglier on the streets. In public, senators will keep talking about process and evidence. In private, they are weighing two different kinds of damage, the personal risk of crossing a vindictive ex-president and the deeper, slower ruin that comes from letting the presidency slip fully loose from the law. In the end, enough of them decide survival, both political and constitutional, requires a vote that sends shockwaves far beyond the Senate the moment it becomes public. When the presiding officer's gavel falls and the words, "The president is hereby removed from office," leave his lips, the shock does not travel evenly. It moves in jagged waves. Inside the chamber, there is no applause, only the scrape of chairs and the low hum of whispered calls home. Outside, on the Capitol steps, one cluster of people erupts in tears and cheers, chanting, "No one is above the law," as if they have been waiting years to say it. A few yards away, another group stares at their phones, faces flushed with fury, shouting, "Coup!" and "Traitors!" into live streams watched by tens of thousands. Across the country, living rooms flicker blue with breaking news graphics. In some houses, people hug in quiet disbelief. In others, the remote slams onto the couch, and a father mutters that the country he thought he knew is gone. Federal authorities have been planning for this moment for days. Barricades ring the Capitol. State houses add extra patrols, and governors are on secure calls with the Department of Homeland Security. Inside command centers, analysts watch social media platforms flood with dueling hashtags, fair restoring the Constitution and Fi Civil War Now trend within minutes of each other. The algorithms cannot tell the difference between accountability and apocalypse. They only know engagement. Markets hesitate, then lurch. Futures wobble as traders try to price in something America has never actually done, remove a president against the will of his most devoted supporters. The dollar dips. then steadies as statements begin to land from abroad. Democratic allies issue carefully worded messages praising the rule of law and constitutional mechanisms functioning as intended. Autocrats go on state television to gloat about Western instability, even as their own advisors quietly study every detail of how a system this messy can still correct itself. And yet, for all the live shots and chirons, what you are seeing on screen is only the surface. If a night like this ever came, the real consequences would unfold in boardrooms, embassies, encrypted group chats, and quiet conversations where people with power decide what this rupture really means and how far the shockwaves will spread. And somewhere, a familiar voice begins shaping the story for millions tonight. In our scenario, within minutes of the vote, the camera cuts to a familiar studio dark blues, a city skyline, a calm face behind the desk. The anchor takes a breath and begins not with celebration, but with history. She reminds viewers that in more than 2 centuries of American government, moments like this can be counted on one hand. She calls it, carefully, a victory for the Constitution, for the principle that no president is bigger than their oath, for the stubborn idea that laws still have teeth. Tonight, she says, democracy won. It is a powerful sentence, and in one sense, it is true. A system that can remove a law-breaking leader without tanks in the streets is doing something many countries only dream of. But zoom out and the picture is darker. A democracy that must use its ultimate weapon against its own elected president is a democracy in profound danger. Almost half the nation may experience this not as justice, but as proof that the system itself is rigged against them. That is the paradox of this night's strength and fragility, accountability and alienation all at once. How the story is told will matter. If coverage turns smug or triumphant, it will salt wounds and feed grievance. If it turns timid, it will fail to explain the real stakes of defending constitutional limits. If a night like this ever comes, it will be narrated live by voices you recognize, and the gap between the story you hear and the reality underneath could shape the struggle between democracy and raw power for years. Step back from the imagined vote, the chants, the chirons, and you see what this exercise is really about. It is not a revenge fantasy or a bit of political fan fiction. It is a way of shining a light on a tension that already shapes our politics every day, the pull between democratic accountability and strongman temptation. Leaders with authoritarian instincts rarely wake up and declare dictatorship. Instead, they test the fence one post at a time. They ignore a subpoena here, bend an ethics rule there, pressure an election official, float the idea that courts lack legitimacy. Each breach becomes the new normal until either the system breaks or someone finally says, "Nuff," and snaps it back. Around such leaders, echo chambers form like armor. Advisors learn that survival means telling the boss what he wants to hear, not what is real. Bad news is softened, dissenters are sidelined, loyalists are promoted for obedience rather than judgment. Over time, decisions are made on fantasy, not facts, and the risks grow wilder. Set that against the other side of our story, institutions that move slowly, argue endlessly, and often disappoint the very people they exist to protect. Courts take months to rule, legislatures deadlock, investigations plod. It is easy to mistake that slowness for weakness. But nights like the one we have imagined remind us that, under enough pressure, those same plodding institutions can still act. The real victory for